I think that of course, there are some risks involved, but for the phase 2 and phase 3 studies, usually those risks are fairly well known. And of course, for phase 4 studies, those are much less risky. But I think that that participation in clinical trials in MS especially have shown more close monitoring, better outcomes in general, even in patients who get the placebo. And a lot of the remyelinating agent trials or neuroprotective trials allow patients to stay on their current immune therapy. They're just add-on therapies, so those are really attractive too. And just participating in general, I think, helps with giving patients a sense of doing something for the better good for everybody, potentially. And as an MS community, I think we appreciate each patient who participates in clinical trials. Some more than others. I think placebo-controlled trials for the immune treatments are getting more and more difficult to enroll patients in because there's so many treatments out there available. Patients don't want to be on placebo, but those clinical trials are getting more and more rare, and so I think that's a challenge to enrollment. And another challenge to enrollment is just the fear of the unknown and not knowing whether or not there might be serious side effects. As far as the risks, we generally have really good animal data, really good phase 1 data before we then proceed to phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. So we just counsel the patients extensively about the safety data, and everybody, I guess, different people have different level of risk tolerance, and so most of the time patients are, they may have failed other treatments, so they're looking for something else to try, and those are generally the patients that we can enroll in clinical trials. Oftentimes when I'm seeing a patient in clinic, I'll offer clinical trial participation as an option. So that's probably the most common way that patients are recruited. They hear about it through word of mouth or through the MS Society. They might hear about clinical trials. We rarely do PSAs about clinical trials, but there's just very different ways of getting the word out there. There's also clinicaltrials.gov, which is an excellent resource. It has it's a NIH database that requires all clinical trials to be enrolled in it, and so there are some studies out there that are not FDA approved, or and they don't register in clinicaltrials.gov. So it would be a good thing to do to make sure it's registered in clinicaltrials.gov, that it is under the FDA guidelines. I would not recommend doing studies that, such as some of the stem cell therapies that aren't approved. There are a lot of different ways. For example, one of the talks was about exercise in MS, and certainly we know that exercise helps in general for general health, but it showed that even mild levels of exercise can really cause some improvement in a cognitive outcome measure. So that's just one small example, of using data from research that's being done to apply to my patients. When I go back, I can say, look, I saw some good evidence that exercise can help with cognition, and granted, it's an early, small study, but I think that it's just something that we can use and take back to the clinic and apply to the patients. The other things that I learned from going to these types of meetings is it gets me energized about the research that's going on in animals that will at some point be translatable into humans. It shows a lot of promise for understanding more about the pathogenesis of MS and what causes MS, so that we can target certain areas to develop in research, and it gives me some excitement, and I think that what really helps MS patients too is to provide hope. So I can bring back to the clinic some of the exciting things I learned and provide hope for even people with some disability to be able to at least partially reverse some of their disability that's accumulated and provide some hope for treatment strategies in the future. I think when I go back to work on Monday, I'm going to bring with me primarily primarily some encouragement about things on the cutting edge for primary progressive MS. I think that that's an area that hasn't been researched as much. It's more difficult to research, and I think it's really exciting, some of the things I've discovered on this so far about the pathophysiology of the primary progressive MS. And I think that when I go back, I'll be able to provide some hope for my patients with primary progressive MS especially. It looks like there are some B-cell therapies that are very exciting, and at least the goal really in primary progressive MS is really to slow down the progression of the disease if possible, and I'm hoping it can help with giving them some hope that we're developing.